My name is Pamela Hutchinson and I'm the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Bloomberg. And it's an honour and a privilege to be here today in discussion with Dominic Reid, OBE, and CEO of the Invictus Games Foundation, and Shani, Dhand, award-winning disability specialist, speaker, and entrepreneur. Welcome. Dominic, as I was preparing for the session today, I was thinking about what it must have been like for you when you got the call to lead on the Invictus Games. I know you've done some amazing events and they've been phenomenal and very visible, but surely this must have been one that gave you pause for thought.
It absolutely did. I mean, it was at one time fantastic, and at another terrifying. Really, I mean, it was an incredible opportunity. But if I look back at my career, I mean, a lot of what I'd done was commemorative. I've worked with veterans a lot, but I was working typically with veterans from the Second World War who were coming towards the end of their lives and getting some sort of recognition. And this is a very different thing. This is about affecting people as they progress along their recovery pathway. So these are young people, and we were delivering real-time help and support on their recovery journey, which is an amazing thing to do. The other thing, of course, is that the scale of it and the time scale in which we had to deliver it was extraordinary. So we had 9 months from getting the phone call to delivering the games in the Olympic Park, and we had a colossal profile to build. So it was quite an adventure.
Was there at any point you thought, I'm not sure if I can actually do this, I can pull it off?
Well, no, we had. I mean, I wasn't alone. We had a great board headed by Sir Keith Mills with a lot of his colleagues from the London 2012 board, and we had a fantastic team of people. We had people embedded within the MOD. We had people from CSM who were specialists in delivering sports events. So we had a good team. I think we knew that we could deliver an amazing event. I think there were two things that we probably didn't know. We didn't know how it would play with the general public, how they would take these stories, this kind of sport, to their hearts. We'd already seen London 2012 and the great success of the Paralympics, but this was a different thing. These are people who weren't known quantities. There weren't characters and personalities that people were aware of. And the other was, they're not professional sports people. So was the sport going to be compelling to watch, or was it just not? And the answer to both those things exceeded all of our expectations. I mean, it was an amazing event that the public warmly took to their heart, and it was a broad public. It was not just people who you'd expect to support military charities. These were people who maybe didn't have an affinity with the military, maybe didn't agree with the wars, but were completely bought in by the human story, by these incredible stories of people overcoming adversity and life-changing injury, which was very, was wonderful to see. And the other thing, of course, was that the sport was incredibly compelling. So sometimes watching somebody come over the line last was the dramatic moment of the day.
No, I can see that. So look, you had the tools and you got on with the job. And talking of people who get on with the job, I'm going to turn, if I may, to you, Shani. You are so proactive and passionate about disability. You have achieved an incredible amount. But, just because you're disabled doesn't necessarily make you predisposed to campaign for disabled rights. And yet you have. Why is it so important to you, and why have you personally engaged with this agenda?
Sure. So, being truthfully honest, it wasn't really something that I had big ambitions to set out to do. As a child, I thought, when I'm older, this is what I want to do. And it happened really organically through just talking about my experiences, and then other people encouraging me to share that wider. As my perspective is pretty unique, I'm a South Asian woman who experiences disability, and I grew up without any sort of role models, anyone relatable that I could look up to, that I felt shared a similar path or story to me. And after continually feeling underrepresented in society, I was really motivated to challenge perceptions and change attitudes by becoming the change that I wanted to see, not only for myself, but for also future generations as well.
And it's interesting. I mean, I'm often asked, sort of people assume that just because I'm a Black woman, that this is, of course, why I'm doing diversity and inclusion. And there's always a backstory. And I know there's a backstory with you too. So can you give us a bit more of the backstory, your upbringing, and how that helped shape you to be the woman that you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born with a rare genetic condition called osteogenesis imperfecta. It's more commonly known as brittle bone disease. And due to that, I have a short stature of 3'10". So just to put that into context, I'm 33 years old and I'm about the height of a very tall 4-year-old. So, I live in a world that isn't designed for me. And then on top of that, I was born into a big South Asian community, and disability faces a further sense of stigma in ethnic minority communities. And, in some parts of the world, and, especially in the UK, I think we've got a really long way to go with the perception of disability. So, my upbringing was sort of layer upon layer upon layer of stigma, not only within my own community, but then also in society as well. So I've faced several challenges. By the age of 14, I'd broken my legs 6 times, and throughout the course of, I think, especially my younger days, I didn't know what I wanted to do. No one really encouraged me to say, yeah, you can go to uni, or this is a career option you could think about. My childhood was mainly spent on focusing on trying not to break any bones. So yeah, and as a result of that, I went to a special needs school. So I think my childhood was a very interesting one, to say the least.
And you talked about how your parents, in a conversation we had earlier, about how your parents treated you exactly like all the other children. And that really did help to sort of shape your resiliency and just getting on with it. It's like you just see yourself as everybody else, as anybody else.
Absolutely. And growing up in my surroundings, I was the only one who had this condition, and I didn't see myself as someone who was 3'10". I just saw myself as how I saw other people. And especially growing up, my parents, they never treated me differently from my siblings. And I would spend months of recovery after broken leg after broken leg. I'd often months be in plaster for a long time, and my mum would still be like, you're not getting away with the chores, you still need to do this, you still need to do that. And I'm so thankful and grateful for them instilling this kind of attitude in me, because then I would have just gone into the world thinking that, I would have been given special treatment at every single point, when actually life is much harder when not only you look different, but you need to access things in a different way. So yeah, I think a lot in my childhood has really set me up for resilience and success now.
Thank you. Well, you've been an incredibly powerful role model, and really, talking of role models, Dominic, as you said yourself, the public really took the Invictus Games to their heart. How much did having Prince Harry as a patron and an ally help in promoting the cause of the disabled, albeit through the lens of the wounded and injured service personnel?
I think it was absolutely vital, and you've got to remember, there wasn't just having him to help promote it. It was his idea. His idea was to bring the Invictus game, or to create the Invictus game, on a model that he'd seen in America, but to make it international, and to involve the friends and family, both of which were crucial things. So he was very, very inspirational in making that happen. And the reason for that is that if you remember, he was in Afghanistan. He did 2 tours out there as a soldier, as an officer, and had to come back when the press blew his cover. He came back on a transport aircraft on his own, in the company of the body of a Danish soldier, which was being repatriated, and 3 British soldiers who were in induced coma, wrapped in plastic, with tubes coming in and out of them, in the dark, through the night, on his own with these people. And it had a profound effect on him. And he tells the story very movingly. And he decided he wanted to do something about the people who were coming back broken by the war. And he put this all in train. So it was absolutely of him. It was his idea. It was his passion and his commitment. And that passion and commitment remains undimmed. So, even though he's not in the UK anymore, that's still very much there. He's still very much a part of us. But having his profile at that time was invaluable. Of course it was. It just made people sit up and take notice. And I think one of the great things that we managed to achieve was a recalibration of people's attitudes towards disability. We certainly had an impact in this country. We certainly had a lot of disabled people coming to us saying, I've been disabled all my life, and I didn't realize that actually having a go in this incredible way was a possibility, and now I'm living my life slightly differently. So that was an amazing effect. But you've got to remember we're international too. So if you look, for example, at Georgia, one of our participating nations, I mean, the attitude to disability in Georgia fundamentally shifted on the success of their sitting volleyball team. It sounds like an extraordinary story, but it's true. They ended up with a victorious medal-winning sitting volleyball team, and it changed the way the public regarded disability. So we've been trying to do that. We've been trying to show that you can overcome, you can do these things, and our cohort are an interesting group of people because most of them were trained both physically and mentally to a very high degree before they had their injury. So they're equipped with lots of extraordinary tools to help them get over it. But in some cases, they've got a heck of a lot to get over. That their recovery pathway is long. It's lifelong, isn't it? I mean, it's all about continuous recovery. One of the guys said to me, one of our trustees who captained the UK team, said to me recently, said, "I used to think I'd recovered, but I haven't. I'm in recovery, and I'll always be in recovery." And to Shani's point, it's challenging, it's hard work, but I think there are some fantastic role models, certainly in our cohort, that demonstrate that you can do the most amazing things.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that for me that I love about the games is that this ability to focus on ability rather than disability, if you see what I mean. And I think that's really important because I think very often when people think about disability, they think about what people can't do as opposed to what people can do. And I think that, that the Invictus Games has been able to really demonstrate that very visibly. Shani, look, role models and allies are incredibly critical to this. We've seen it with Prince Harry. We've seen it with the work you and both Dominic have been doing. I'd love to sort of explore a little. We started touching on it a little bit, that intersection of being both Asian as well as a woman. And then on top of all of that, you're also disabled. How have you used those three dimensions in a way to enable you to inspire across numerous dimensions of diversity? And what have been some of the challenges in that sort of triple dimension?
Sure. So yeah, it's almost a triple threat, isn't it? It's, layer upon layer. But what it really gives me is a really unique perspective of the world. And what that means is I can offer such a diversity of thought that, my colleagues and counterparts won't, because they're also really different as well. And they've had different experiences. And I am a huge advocate of intersectionality, and I think that the conversation of diversity is typically addressed in a singular approach that segregates identity. And whilst that's helpful in starting the diversity conversation, it's just far more complex than that. And it's why I think, in 2020, I still feel underrepresented. And, talking about the challenges, my reality is that, as an Asian disabled woman, I can experience bias and discrimination in multiple ways as a consequence of my race, my ability and gender, or as a combination of all three. And with each of these identities come their own nuances, stigmas, and expectations. And, it's just a melting pot of all of that continuously. So if I'm being honest, half of my time is being spent trying to figure out, why am I being treated in this way? Is it because of my race? Is it because of my gender? Or is it because someone is judging my ability? And just to bring that to life, just to give you a really quick example, as a person of colour, I'm 3 times as likely to be unemployed, or if in work, I'm likely to be underpaid. As a disabled person, I'm twice as likely to be unemployed, or if in work, likely to be underpaid, and as a woman, I'm likely to earn less than my male colleagues. Now, putting all that together, it sounds so bleak, and this example relates to employment, highlighting all the different gaps and privileges. But this example can be applied to a variety of life situations, and it's why starting from intersectionality with everything that we do is so important.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, according to the Harking Institute, 1 billion people worldwide are affected by disabilities and face unemployment rate of 80%. I mean, let's just think about that for a few seconds. 1 billion people. What a phenomenal waste of untapped talent. Dominic, I'd love to just move to you for a little bit to just explore the impact that the Games had on you personally. We know that the general public took to it, but what did the impact of the Games have on you? What did you learn about yourself and about the participants that you could perhaps share with our audience today that would help shift mindsets for leaders in business?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think if you do any big projects, and I've been very fortunate to do some really interesting stuff during my life, it does have an effect on you. I mean, a profound effect. And certainly with Invictus, it forced me to re-examine my attitude towards disability and to become comfortable with. I mean, you've got to remember that I'm talking about a particular group of people who were wounded in war or injured in training, or in some cases who were diagnosed with sickness during their military service. But the disability element of it was something that I had to come to terms with and become comfortable with, and it's changed my attitude to disability to the people around me. There's no question of that. In terms of the cohort that we're talking about, our men and women, I mean, at one level, they're familiar. They're men and women who've served in the military, as I once did, and so you have a commonality, you have an understanding, you have a kind of a language. But they've faced things that I will never face, that I have never faced, that most people should never have to face, both in terms of the physical injury that they've sustained, but also the mental component to that. So, every physical injury has a mental dimension to it, a psychological dimension to it, and a social dimension to it. And that's something that we've learnt a lot about. I think also there's a fascinating way in which this particular group of people were injured. The ones who were injured in Afghanistan and Iraq were subject to blast injury fundamentally. And that is something that we haven't seen really since the First World War in any real quantity. And we had lost the learning that we had achieved around that. And so what you now find is that science is beginning to understand more about blast injury. So these are men and women who have been, yes, they've lost limbs in many cases. Some of them won't have done. Some of them might just be suffering from what we would call an invisible injury. But they will have had the effects of blasts, and that has an effect on the physiology, and science has a lot of work to do around that. So there are all sorts of fascinating pieces of research and discovery to be made. And you've got a group of people there who are, fit and able and willing to subject themselves to if you like, to scrutiny, to not to experimentation, but as a research base. It's an opportunity that can't be lost, because what's learnt from them, what they're suffering, will help everybody. It'll improve the human condition. It will help people who are disabled in other ways, because we will learn more about those impacts and effects and how it works. So part of what we do at the foundation is to try and promote research and to deal with ways in which we can talk about it, but also ways in which organizations and scientists can look at different elements of it. And in a world where I think things are increasingly in silos, we can ask questions that maybe bring people together to look at interesting ways of approaching mental illness, for example. I mean, there's some very exciting cutting edge research now being done around inflammation and mental illness and the extent to which it's physiological as opposed to psychological. There's an extraordinary amount that's being learnt about the mechanics of the body when once you lose a limb and how that impacts you. I mean, it's endless, and it's very valuable work, and we're in a very privileged position to be able to influence that. And I hope, I hope very much today you've got organisations listening into this who are interested in the possibilities in that, because we are, very keen to find partners who can help us deliver on what we're doing, because we're doing some very interesting, very exciting work, but we're under-resourced, and we desperately need corporate partners and philanthropic partners to be able to help us deliver what we can do, not only for the benefit of these men and women who've served and given a huge amount, but also for the good of all of us, because we can all learn and we can all benefit.
Thank you. Well, there's a call to action there. So thank you. Shani, I know nothing's got in your way. Nobody's limited your ambitions or your aspirations, and you've achieved an incredible amount despite the odds. I know I come across so many people with disabilities just knocking it out the park every single day, despite the fact that there are stereotypes, misinformation and bias which prevents them from achieving their full potential. What do you think it will take to change perceptions across industry to enable talented disabled individuals to fulfill their full potential across across organisations?
So there's a few things that I wanted to highlight, and they're really easy. And the first is everybody getting comfortable and understanding what disability actually is. So, I'm not disabled by the condition that I was born with. I'm only disabled when I experience barriers or bias. And I also think that we need to, not get hung up on definitions so much. It is literally, the barriers and bias that people face in society that actually causes disablement. I also think that as a society, we don't understand the prevalence. Here in the UK, 8 out of 10 people acquire their disability during their lifetime in work. Now, if businesses knew this, they would understand that this is going to affect their employees, and that this will affect their customers too, and that they, would already be designing products in a more universally and accessible way for everybody, because we know that when you design things for disabled people, it's suitable for the whole majority of society in general. And I also think that we need to understand that today in 2020, we have the solutions to make life more equitable for disabled people. It's not as hard as people think, but what stops us is our fear of making mistakes, our fear of offending people. We're not even confident to have conversations about disability. So what I would urge is to everyone to get to grips with that. And as Dominic said, get uncomfortable, with it, and you'll learn. You'll see that it's just not a big thing. It's not a them and us situation.
Thank you. Appreciate you saying that. Look, we're slowly coming to the end of our segment, and I could continue talking to you both for the rest of the afternoon. But you have a platform right now, and you're speaking to business people. What would you like to leave them with that will inspire them to address disabled representation across industry?
From my point of view, I absolutely agree with what Shani just said. I would say to them, this isn't about, we've got to try and find jobs for these poor people. Certainly speaking about my cohort, is you really want to get on the front foot and have one of these guys working for you, because they're in short supply and you're going to miss out if you don't have one. I mean, if you have got somebody who's decided to have an elective amputation of their leg because it wasn't working the way they wanted it to, and it means that they can run faster with a prosthetic, that's a kind of determination and attitude, and that brings a very powerful mindset to the workplace. You might want to hook into some of that. There are a fantastic group of people out there who have an awful lot to offer and to give. And it's not a question of feeling sorry for them, filling the gaps, doing it because you should. It's because they're extraordinary people and you want extraordinary people working for you.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Shani.
And And just to echo that, the business case for diversity, inclusion, belonging in the workplace is so overwhelming, but it's also crucial to business recovery, especially, in this time that we're experiencing because of the pandemic. And most businesses will agree that building a pipeline of sustainable talent is vital. However, it's really hard to find the people with the right skills to boost growth. So do consider the untapped pool of talent that everyone has been overlooking, that is disabled people. We are so resilient, we're talented. I think that if I wasn't 3'10", I wouldn't be a great event manager or problem solver. It is my superpower almost. So just as Dominic said, look into that talent pool. There's so many of us, and it's going to keep growing and growing.